Hello there and welcome back to another video here on Wristwatch Revival. My name is Marshall. Thank you so much for coming along. This time on the bench, we have a really cool watch. This is a Glycine Airman. This was actually the first watch featuring a GMT complication. That's the ability to tell us a second time zone with the watch. It also is a military watch, and as such, it has a 24-hour dial. Do you see that? This watch doesn't just tell time in the normal 12 and then 12. It's all hours at once on the dial. And so that's kind of cool. And then it has this rotating bezel. You can loosen it and then lock it with that lower crown. And that little spike off the back of the hour hand, that'll point to a second time zone. And that's, of course, really useful for many different situations. But one of them would be when you're in the military and you'd like to know what time it is at home. And this watch was actually debuted in 1953, and it was made in conjunction with the U.S. Air Force, and it ended up being sold in the military stores for a lot of years. It was very popular in Vietnam as well. And yeah, as you can see, it's a 24-hour dial. So every hour is just that little tiny corner there. And yeah, neat complications on a cool military watch. Let's start by taking off the watch band. I don't really know what kind of project we've got on our hands here. I've always liked this watch. I've always thought it was a cool design and has really great history with it. But I bought this one off of eBay. Now, this watch is pretty popular. So even in this condition, this watch was quite expensive. It was about $1,000 for it as it sits here. I mean, this thing was pricey considering, I mean, take a look at it. It's pretty nasty. Yeah, so today you and I are going to restore this thing. We're going to take it apart, see what's going on with it, and get it looking and running as good as we can. Speaking of that, let's see how it's running right now. Uh-oh. Okay, so this is my Timegrapher, and it will read how quick or slow the movement is running. And it is actually having a hard time just getting a reading at all. And when it does, we call it the snowstorm. You see how those dots are just everywhere? You want those to be in nice parallel lines. And instead, it can't even get a reading off of it. So that's actually not really great news for my investment here. But let's start by taking the back off and seeing what we've got movement-wise. Ah, there it is. You can see this is an automatic watch. It'll wind itself just from you wearing it. And wait a second. Look at this. Yeah. Okay. Well, that explains why I could turn the crown and nothing would happen. It is missing the crown wheel. It looks like it's just completely gone. See, it's supposed to interact with this part right here, right there. That's the sliding clutch. And there's nothing for it to grab onto because that wheel that's supposed to go right there is gone. And of course, it will interact then with the ratchet wheel. And that's how you wind the watch. It's also part of how you set the watch. So interestingly, this watch probably hasn't been fixed because since it is an automatic, you technically don't ever need to manually wind it. So you can kind of live without that, but that's not going to stand. We got to get this thing working properly, of course. So what we'll first start to do is get the movement taken out of the case. And that means removing the winding crown. Now that other crown that you see sitting there, it doesn't actually go into the movement. It is there just to lock the rotating bezel that's on the front in place so that you can set that second time zone. So we won't need to take that crown out, but that one, of course, does need to come out. It looks like there's a little kind of a grommet here as well. So we'll just set that aside. And yeah, cool. The movement comes right out. And there it is. As you can see, the dial's kind of in interesting shape. You can tell that it's been well used, let's say, but also kind of has a nice patina to it. A little dark maybe, but kind of has that military vibe going. We'll start by taking off the watch hands, and I'll put those in a membrane box here just to keep them safe. Yeah, this watch, you know, this Airman, it really does have a lot of history. I mean, the GMT function became quite popular and is to this day. You know, the most popular is the Rolex GMT. It's called the GMT Master or the GMT Master 2 that has that functionality. But this one predates that, or at least is really close to when it came out. And it is credited with being the first ever GMT. But sometimes you can read it and it says one of the first ever GMTs. So I'll let you decide. The companies really care about, which one got to market first, and so that they can say that they were first. But let's be honest, that's just kind of marketing stuff. The cool part about this is that it's been around for a very long time with that functionality, and it was made very much for a purpose. And as I said, it's so you can tell a second time zone. And, if you're in the military and you're deployed, it's really nice to know, what time it is back home when you can make phone calls and what's going on there. It kind of keeps you connected. And of course, this watch also has that cool 24-hour dial, probably pretty handy if you're in the military, I would assume. We can take off the hour wheel here. I'd like to try to get to the cannon pinion underneath so that I can take that off. The reason for that is because when we eventually get to the other side of the watch and start doing the disassembly there, one of the wheels is attached to the cannon pinion via friction, and it won't come out unless we remove the cannon pinion. So I'd like to do that up front here before we get to the other side of the movement. Usually when watch repairers are talking about the movement, which side it's on, they usually talk about it like this is the dial side, because, side that the dial attaches to. And then the other side, they have different movement side, or I've even heard some people call it the watchmaker side. It's kind of where all the action is. This one has a fair bit going on as well, because it has this date function, as you can see going around. And I really like the red numerals on the date. I think it just kind of stands out, and it's really cool. I can see why these watches are so popular, by the way. They're a really nice size to wear, and they're very functional. I mean, a GMT watch with a 24-hour dial, and it's an automatic with a date function, like that's a lot. And this one was probably made, I guess in the 60s, somewhere in that range was when this one was probably manufactured. So you get that kind of vintage vibes going too, if you're into that. Okay, so now we can turn the watch over. We've got enough of the calendar side taken apart. And the first thing we'll do is take off the automatic winding works. There's a separate bridge just for the automatic works. And again, the automatic part, which is the part that you're looking at here, that thing that spins around, is called the winding rotor. And whenever it spins around, which is, by the way, very natural for that to happen when you have it on your wrist, because you raise your hand up to say hello to somebody, you're typing, you're going for a walk, you're unloading the groceries, whatever, that rotor is going to spin around. And as it does, it winds up the watch. Speaking of winding up the watch, we do need to unwind the watch. So we're going to do what's called let down the mainspring. Sorry if I let you down, mainspring. And that'll just take all the power out of the watch so that there's no tension, right? There's no pressure on any part here, so that when I go to remove it, nothing goes flying away. Additionally, we'll take off the balance assembly here, and similar reasoning, just to keep it from getting damaged. If it's sitting on the movement, it's relatively safe, but as you'll see here, like I have to start taking apart a bunch of stuff that's around it, and it's a little easier to not have to work around it since it needs to come off anyway. Okay, here's the ratchet wheel. So it comes off normally. It's a little bit lonely. It's missing its good friend, the crown wheel, which we'll have to do something about as well before we're done with this restoration. I just love restoring watches like this. These ones just always have such a cool history to them. You can just kind of imagine somebody having worn this from a totally different era. All right, we'll take off the barrel. Ooh, that's interesting. So the barrel actually looks like a ratcheting mechanism on the bottom that attaches to this wheel right here. That is pretty cool. And this wheel looks like it's actually screwed into place. So I'll need to take out that wheel first, and then I can get to the one underneath. But for now, I'm just going to leave it because I can take those off after I get the rest of this part of this watch taken apart. So we'll take off the train wheel bridge. This will reveal the train of wheels, which are kind of, I don't know. I think most people, when they think of a watch, that's the part that they think about inside. Take a look at when I take this off and tell me if that clicks for you. We call them wheels. I think a lot of people will call those gears. You'll see them here. There you go. That's kind of the part, right? Like Little wheels and gears inside of a watch. By the way, this part here comes off nicely. This is the center seconds hand wheel. And as you can see, everything just kind of comes apart easily from here. Now, there's the sliding clutch and the clutch wheel. The clutch wheel was the part that was sticking up earlier. I actually said sliding clutch, but I meant clutch wheel. And it's a little lonely too, because again, the crown wheel is the one that goes in between, and it's missing. Now this is a little auxiliary bridge that sits down below, and it goes directly over the center wheel, which you'll see right there. This is the part, by the way, not this one, that's the escape wheel, but the big one underneath it, that's the one that's attached to the cannon pinion via friction on the other side that I needed to get to that cannon pinion first so that that wheel would ultimately just come free. I'm going to get the pallet fork and the pallet fork bridge out of the way because it's actually sitting right over the edge of that center wheel, but now it'll come out. There we go. And as you can see, it just comes right out nice and free, and that's because we took that cannon pinion off the other side. Now, again, this little bit of a weird setup with the barrel here. It's got this ratcheted piece on the bottom and then this extra wheel on the side that is held in place by a screw. So I'm going to take that out, and I'm just going to use a little bit of Rodico to take it out. Rodico is this sort of magical putty substance. It's kind of like silly putty for adults, I guess, or for people that are into watches. And it's really great at just grabbing stuff. Now, if you look, there's an inner ring on the calendar side once again, and this ring is actually what holds the calendar ring, the outer part there, in place. So I'll take out these 3 screws to remove it, and then I can simply just take away the calendar ring here. I like to put this disc in one of these little holders as well. It's probably not super necessary, but at least the way that I work on watches is that there can be a long time sometimes between when I do the disassembly and then when I get any parts that are needed or information that I need or whatever to get things going again and do it. I like to try to keep that stuff safe. It's a little bit of a shame if anything gets damaged while it's just supposed to be sitting there. Okay, now we can take apart the keyless works. And as you can see, they actually come out quite easily as well. So far, so good. The only real standout issue here is that crown wheel that was outright missing. To be fair, this watch was listed on eBay as for parts and repair, which is like my favorite 3 words ever, 4 words ever. Yeah, I absolutely love it when it says that because it means I've got a big challenge ahead of me. Because people only put that on there if the thing isn't running at best, or if it's just a disaster inside. And then you and I get to go on a bit of an adventure. This one already has some pretty major issues. It's just straight up missing parts. That's not normal. Okay, so keyless works have now come completely apart. And that just leaves a little weird kind of cover plate thing. I'm not 100% sure exactly what this part's for, but whatever. We're just taking everything apart. I think this might actually have something to do with the calendar. Yeah, I think that might be the thing that like bumps the calendar over. Okay, now we can put the balance back in place. This is all kind of a precursor to everything getting into the watch cleaning machine, because this is how this works. And this is one of the reasons why I love restoring watches, is you get to take every single thing apart. It feels a little weird to do it the first few times because you're just like, really? Like, what if I can ever get this back together? And I mean, you can see the pile of parts starting to form on my bench here, and you go, oh my goodness, how am I ever getting this back together? But once you understand what each of the parts actually, how it functions and what it's for, your brain starts to get used to the idea of like, okay, that's going to go there. That's going to go there. That's going to go there. And yeah, you get stuck. Everybody gets stuck every once in a while. It puts the wrong part in every once in a while. It happens. These are still very complicated ultimately, but I'll tell you, our capacity to figure these things out and get used to it is a lot higher than at least I thought when I first started. Cause to me, it looked impossible, right? I watch videos on YouTube from one of my favorite watch channels, one that inspired me really to try this out for myself, the watch repair channel with Mark Lovick. And he was a very experienced watchmaker making videos. So he made it look really easy, but at the same time, it was like, nah, I can do this. And he was the one who inspired me to start, doing this myself. I really enjoyed watching his videos, but then he kind of, through watching his videos, I was like, no, maybe I could actually try this myself. And that was, a number of years ago. And now this is one of my favorite things to do. Okay, so that's the automatic works apart. Only one more thing left to take apart before we can start turning our attention to that watch cleaning machine that I mentioned, and that's the barrel. And how does the mainspring look? Hey, it looks intact. Yeah, so when you turn the crown, as I did at the beginning, and nothing happens, it usually means that the mainspring's broken, and that's what I would assume for this. But it wasn't the case this time. As we found out, it was because there's no crown wheel, so there's no tension to be put on the crown itself when you're winding. So it could, your brain, as you start to learn this stuff, will go to certain things automatically, but it's not always that thing. Okay, so mainspring out, and it actually looks like it's in pretty good shape. And that means we can get everything ready for cleaning. So what we do with these type of things, the movement parts, is we put them in these little mesh baskets, and then that'll keep them, safe and secure, and not so that we don't lose them basically. And then these mesh baskets will go into a bigger mesh basket with the bigger movement parts, and then all of that will go through the watch cleaning machine and all of its processes. And these are the types of, deep cleaning that you can do. And you can do manual cleaning with like a brush or a piece of pegwood. You can do a combination of them. You can use an ultrasonic cleaner. There's many ways to get this done, but yeah, I think that the watch cleaning machine is probably the best. It looks like it has the original gasket on it here, which means that if I can take it off, which I believe I can, I can get my tweezers under the edge so that I can take this off. It's going to be quite brittle. And yeah, it is. This is supposed to be like a supple gasket, meant to keep the water out. And that one looks like it's basically turned to just hard plastic. So I will need to be replacing that. And while I'm here, I mentioned a little bit of manual cleaning. Yep, that's part of the deal. So I'll take a piece of pegwood, which is just shaped wood that's kind of dense so that you can whittle it to whatever shape you want so that you can do cleaning or holding or pushing or placing or whatever with that. Last thing to check out is the case itself. Now we've got this bezel, we've got this extra crown, and it looks like it doesn't come off. It's just got that extra piece of metal that locks in the bezel. So I'm just going to leave that on. I can use my case opening knife to take off this bezel. I think it should just pop off pretty easily. Yeah, it does. Ooh, that's a lot of dirt under there. Okay, but this looks in decent shape. We'll run that through the cleaner as well, though. And this has quite a bit of dirt going on, as well as this funky setup for that locking mechanism. Again, I'm just going to use some pegwood here to kind of run along the outside. That'll knock off a good chunk of the remaining dirt. And oh, geez. Okay, well, it worked. I got the crystal out, and this crystal is in terrible shape. I am going to need to replace it. Although, oh, interesting. So I actually thought that the magnifier was on the outside of the crystal, but it's on the inside. That means I may be able to refurbish it instead of have to replace it, because I don't know where I'm getting another one. It also has a tension ring, a metal tension ring on the inside, which aids in keeping the watch waterproof. Okay, so here's the watch cleaning machine that I was talking about before. And again, there's the basket. It's going to go into place, and then boom, gets plunged into liquid. That's why these parts can kind of be floating around in there. When they're in liquid, they don't bang up against each other. And then it'll go through a 3-step cleaning process. While the watch is getting cleaned up, I did want to say I've got a Patreon for this channel. If you like what I do here and you'd like to support me, patreon.com/wristwatchrevival is the place to go. There's a link in the description below. And it's basically just a way to give back to your favorite creators. There's many, many creators on there. I'm not the only one. And, it's a great way to support your favorite content creators, whether it's podcasts or videos like mine or music or artwork. It's great to support the smaller creators out there directly, and that's what Patreon is for. And plus, it's cool for you too. For example, on my Patreon, you get a thank you card and a Wristwatch Revival sticker in the mail, no matter what level you sign up for. And you can also get access to my videos a little bit earlier, like a rough cut version of it before I post it up here on YouTube. So anyway, thank you so much to everybody who supports me on Patreon. It really does mean the world. And while that's going, we'll also put the case parts into the ultrasonic cleaner here. This is a great tool for cleaning, especially bigger stuff like the case and bracelets and things like that. But you can also use it to clean the watch movement itself. It just takes kind of a lot longer because you want to do a multi-step process, and that means moving the parts from jar to jar, and it can just be kind of time consuming. So there we go. Everything looks much better. I usually run my ultrasonic cleaner for about 25 minutes. It also has a heat function so that helps it work even better and get everything all cleaned up and looking great. Now, one thing I did notice was that some of the numbers don't have the paint in them anymore, and the ultrasonic took out even more of that, which I kind of expected to happen. And so what I'm going to do is just repaint the numbers. I'm going to re-enamel them so that they're all matching and everything's there. And that means, though, that I need to take out the existing paint. And I'm just going to use a pair of tweezers to kind of gently get in there. A little bit of Rodico goes a long way, too, to help clean it up and get all these numbers cleared off. And I have to say, it's a very satisfying experience to do this, especially when the paint just kind of breaks free. It's not uncommon for the paint to come out of these numbers, and so then you have some with paint in it and some without, and it just doesn't look very good, I don't think. And like I said, the ultrasonic cleaner will take out a good amount of that paint as well. But as you can see, I can just go around carefully and use my fine point tweezers to do that. Oh, that feels so good. All right, let's get this 8. Yes. Oh, that was a good one. Oh man. Okay. So that's all done. But of course we need to replace that paint, or else we've really completely changed kind of the look of this watch. It actually doesn't look bad with no enamel in it, but I've got some black enamel paint that I'm going to use to replace. And this is kind of an interesting process because it's too small to like paintbrush in there without getting it over the lines. So I'm just going to use a piece of pegwood here, take some of the enamel, and I'm just going to put it over the entire number. And then I can just take my bare finger and just gently go over the top of it, and it'll kind of squeegee off the rest of the paint. Okay, that was a little bit messy. But there, with just a finger, you can see it will just leave the paint inside. And so my job now is just to go around this entire bezel and do this one at a time and just gently remove the excess paint. And as you can see, that's exactly what I'm going to do. And you kind of get a feel for it over time. And eventually it gets to the point where you're like, okay, I can kind of feel out how I can do this. And you can do multiple layers if you want as well. I think I'm going to stick with one. I like it to be kind of recessed there. The one issue with it is that it leaves a little bit of extra paint on the bezel, as you can see, so it looks kind of sloppy, but it's pretty easily fixed. All I need to do is take a swab here with a little bit of isopropyl alcohol on it, and that will remove the extra, but leave the paint inside. And look how it looks when it's all done. Nice, right? So the bezel's all clean, repainted, and ready to go. And with that, we can start our reassembly of the watch. This one's already been a bit of a chore. We've got missing parts and now had to paint the bezel as well, but I think it'll be worth it in the end. We'll start by doing some mainspring winding, and this is probably my favorite tool. There's like 5 of them that are tied, but this is definitely one of the coolest. This is a very watchmaking specific tool. It's really only made for this one purpose, which is to wind the mainspring back into place safely. You can actually do it with your hand. You can push it back into the barrel, but it gets, well, it's a little tricky because it can come flying out at any time, but also you are very likely to damage it or bend it. And this it gives you a way to safely reuse a mainspring. And this mainspring looks like it's in perfectly fine shape. In fact, it looks like a modern mainspring, which makes me wonder if maybe somebody tried to repair this watch and broke it, and that's why I ended up with it. Not 100% sure, but as you can see, the mainspring is now in the mainspring winder. I'll set that aside because before we actually put the mainspring back in the barrel, I need to put some braking grease around the outside of the edge. And the reason for that is that mainspring will actually slide around that edge, and you need a little bit of grease there to make sure that it doesn't slide too much. That's why it's called braking grease. But also, you don't want metal on metal. You know, you get metal shavings in there, and of course, those can help to really wear the parts quickly. And this braking grease does it. Now, this is the best part. Oh, there we go. Oh, how beautiful is that? See, this is why these tools are so cool. Because, I mean, there isn't another tool that can do that. It just puts the whole mainspring back into place safely, and you even get that satisfying sound with it as well. Okay, next we can put on the barrel arbor. It goes in the middle, and it has a little hook. You can't really see it, but it grabs on to the inner coil of that mainspring. And when you wind your watch, either by the automatic works with your arm moving, or if you use the crown to wind it manually, that's the part that actually grabs on and pulls against that mainspring to tighten it and wind it. And then the mainspring is basically just trying to undo itself. And that's the power that we're capturing whenever we have a watch running. Now I just need to put the lid back on. And you can see there's that weird ratcheting system on the bottom as well. Still not sure exactly what that's about. It might have something to do with the calendar. But at any rate, we need to put in those bottom parts in first, because the barrel will actually sit on top of those. So we'll put that one in, and then we'll follow up with that other wheel that goes alongside it. I don't know the name of it. Careful. Okay, there we go. And before we put in the barrel, I can also put in now the center wheel. I'm going to put a little bit of oil on it because it is going to be metal on metal against that hole in the middle. And I just want to make sure that it can run smoothly. And there's that little intermediate bridge that we took off as well. That only has one job. You ever told anybody that you only had one job? Well, this thing actually only has one job, and it's just to hold that center wheel in place. So we'll go ahead and screw that down. So now the center wheel's good, and it looks like the barrel itself is ready to be put back into place here. I am going to use a little bit of lubrication here, though, on the top of the center wheel. And if you ever use a little bit too much or you make a mess, the Rodico to the rescue. Ideally, you don't have to use it too often, but sometimes you do. I'm going to use some grease here as well on this ratcheting part. This is held under some amount of tension on the bottom, as you can see, of the barrel. And I mean, I'm assuming that this is a ratcheting system, meaning that these are like a clutch, like they're rubbing up against each other. They can only go one direction, but still that has the chance to create quite a bit of friction. And I want to make sure that this watch is going to be running for a very long time. So I'm going to go ahead and use a little bit of, we call that Mobius 9501 grease. Mobius is just the company that makes it, and then the name is the type of grease. There's a bunch of ones you can use. 9501 is my favorite, but I've used one called Molykote DX, and it works just fine. It's actually a lot more inexpensive than the Mobius as well. Okay, so now we can put on the barrel bridge. It also has the click attached to it. And before we put anything on top of that, I'm going to take a little bit of medium viscosity oil and I just press it in between where that barrel arbor and that bridge sit, and that'll give it a little bit of extra lubrication there. And now we can put the train of wheels into place. Once again, this is the seconds wheel, and it is going to need a little bit of light viscosity oil in there as well. That's what the seconds hand will eventually attach to. And then probably the most important wheel here is the escape wheel. It's a big part of the genius behind these movements. The shape of the teeth on the wheel are kind of what allow it to go. And now I can very carefully take the train of wheels bridge, or the train wheel bridge, or the train bridge, depending on who you're talking to. And I can line up the pivots from the train. And once I'm happy, which I'm not, because I can see that the escape wheel's not turning, which means that it or another wheel are not properly lined up. Again, a little bit of patience goes a long way here. There we go. Now we can see the escape wheel actually turning. So I'll keep a little bit of pressure on that bridge while I grab the screws so that I can make sure that those pivots don't come out of place while I'm fidgeting around with the screws themselves. Okay. So with that secured in place, now the train wheel's all set. And now I can put on the ratchet wheel. But of course, got to figure out what to do with that missing crown wheel. And after looking around online a little bit, I found that the best option was probably just to buy a donor movement. Partially because I was able to determine that part was missing straight away. Like once we got the movement once we got the case back off the watch, we knew that. And so I figured that could be one of many issues that this watch has. So I just went ahead and got this donor movement. So as you can see, here's the missing crown wheel itself. So I'll go ahead and take it out of this movement and then just give it a quick cleaning. And then I assume I can just install it right onto the other movement. So let's just give it a shot. Everything should fit. Basically, always parts, as long as it's the same movement, are interchangeable unless something weird happens. All right. And does this fit correctly? Looks good. And now all I have to do is screw it down and we will have replaced the part. Now it's worth noting that this is a left-handed screw. Wait a minute. Why is it just turning? Weird. Oh, I think I know what's going on here, actually. Yeah, so the post itself, which is part of the base of the movement, I think it got stripped. And now that I think about it, I know what happened with this thing. That is a left-handed screw, meaning that you screw it the opposite way to tighten it down. And that's the same thing with removing it. And so what that means is when you go to remove it, if you do it to the left like you normally would, lefty-loosey, you are tightening it down. And guess what happens when you tighten it down? You strip it pretty dang quick. And my guess is that whoever was trying to work on this didn't know that and stripped out that part. And the problem is part of the main plate of the watch, where it screws into. So I'm going to completely disassemble that watch, completely disassemble the new watch, and now replace the base plate here, the main plate underneath, with the one from the donor movement. And then finally get all the way back to this point. This is very disheartening, by the way, when you have to completely undo something. And now we should be able to install it once again. So here we go. The moment of truth. And no, it's still it isn't working. What is going on? Oh my God. Oh, I know what I did. So this part right here is the upper bridge, right, for the train of wheels. That is actually what the screws into, not the main plate. I don't know what I was thinking. I'm just going to test it out. And yep, sure enough, the screw actually grabs on to the upper bridge from the donor movement. Here's the problem. I want this watch to be as original as I can have it be. And what that means is I want the original main plate. And what that means is I need to take this thing completely apart and rebuild it again. This is the third time that I'm doing this, but I want to do it right. I don't want a donor main plate if I can use the original. Now I am going to have to use a donor bridge here on the top, but I mean, the other one's non-functional. So this is a matter of necessity. But you know, sometimes you just got to take a deep breath and go at it again. And I'll tell you, as I've learned here, the more that you go through taking apart and reassembling the same movement, the more you get to know it. And I feel like this one and I are very, very good friends at this point. Maybe it's overstayed its welcome a little and I could use a break. But at any rate, once again, I'm going to reassemble it back onto the original main plate with all the original parts except for the train wheel bridge. And now, finally, the next moment of truth. Will this thing screw in? And I already know it will because I tested it before, right? You saw me do that. And here we go. Here we go. Celebrate with me. Yes, we did it. We have a crown wheel on this movement and we're good to go. Okay, flipping it back over. Take a deep breath, everybody. I can now put the cannon pinion back into place. And as I mentioned before, that's held on by friction. And so I just need to push it down into place using my tweezers, and then we can continue with the rebuild. On the other side of the movement here, we're going to start with the keyless works. And I do need to make sure that this is working properly as well, because this is part of what was affected by that crown wheel being missing. But like I said, I would bet serious money that the person who tried to work on this watch did not know that it was reverse threaded and just completely destroyed the threading in the post there on that upper bridge. And that's what happened. I've seen it before. Because the problem is that your instinct when you turn it and it feels tight is to turn it more, right? Because you're like, oh, it needs to be loosened up. That is, and of course, that's the exact opposite of what you want to do on a relatively small project like a watch like this. You know, you just start torquing on the screws that hard and they will break. Okay, sliding clutch. We've got the yoke in place here as well. And now the yoke spring. I'm going to bring in the reinforcements here with this pointer stick just to help hold it into place. That is a lesson that I learned the hard way numerous times. It's always better to try to stabilize a spring like that with an additional tool if you can, rather than just trying to go in there with the tweezers and see what happens. I know what happens. And it involves flashlights and magnets and the carpet. So you don't want any part of it. After securing the setting lever, now we can put on this last little setting lever spring, which also is kind of like a little cover plate. And I think there's one other cover plate that we need for a little bit further up the trough. But okay, let's give it a quick test and make sure that this thing winds. Yes. And sets. Okay, good. That looks good. That's really important. Again, just because I want to make sure that anything that was touching the broken part, we're 100% sure about. And this looks good to me. So now I can use a little bit of this blue grease to make sure that the setting lever moves smoothly to its positions. And then yes, I got a little too much on there. So some Rodico to clean it up. And yeah, here's that last little cover plate up here. Sometimes watches that have calendar mechanisms will have a few extra plates like this one. Kind of creates a little foundation. Okay, now we can put on the pallet fork, because it is getting to that point. Remember, this thing was running horrendously bad. It couldn't even get a reading on the Timegrapher machine. So we want to make sure that it kicks up and runs, and then also that it runs well. Okay, pallet fork and pallet fork bridge in place. Just a quick check to make sure it jumps back and forth with very little effort, and it certainly does. So things looking good here. Let's get the balance in place and see if it'll kick up. This is always the most tense part of working on a watch. I'm actually going to use this screw to help kind of stabilize the bridge. Now you don't want to tighten it down all the way at this juncture because you don't know that the pivots and everything are lined up, but you can use it to help you kind of steady the ship a little bit. Ah, there we go. A beautiful sight to see. A running watch movement. It really never gets old. If you do ever try out this hobby, and by the way, I want you to, I think you should. Watch restoration is awesome. It's super rewarding. You'll find that this is the best part. And look how beautiful that is. Nothing more beautiful than that. Now, we need to oil the jewels on this watch. And one that I don't get to show normally because it's very, very difficult for me to get on camera is oiling, or in this case, it's more like a grease on the pallet fork jewels. So as you can see, I'm trying to put just the tiniest little dot of this grease on the tip of the pallet fork there. And normally I do it when it's actually on the watch. But here I did it on the microscope so that you could see it. I wanted to show you. And now we can finish oiling up the rest of the watch. So just a little tiny droplet of oil there. The challenge when you're oiling is actually to use as little as you can. It's tempting to just say, hey, the more the merrier with oil. That is not the case though, with such tiny, tiny proportions like this. If you put too much in, gravity will actually and capillary action will actually pull that oil all the way through to the wheel, and it'll leave the pivot itself potentially dry or with less oil than it should have. So you actually need to use just the right amount, which is generally speaking a very, very, very small amount of oil. It's similar here as well with this cap jewel. It needs just a little droplet of oil on the top to be suspended above the pivot. But the other factor with it is that it needs to be clean. So I'm putting it in some solvent here just to kind of get any initial gunk off of it. But often that's not enough. And I'll show you what I mean. You want this to be really spotless. And if you look, do you see the dried on oil on there still? Yeah. So that needs to come off. So the best way to do that is just a little bit of manual labor here. Go for the pegwood, and you can just manually kind of scrape at it to break up that oil deposit. Then put it back in the one dip, which is again just a solvent that'll help dissolve anything that's left over on it. And I'll show you what it looks like afterwards. Boom. That's what you want. You want that flat, beautiful, shiny surface with no debris on it, and that'll help the watch run at its absolute best. And again, I'll show you this part too. That's how much oil you want to have in the middle of that jewel there. You don't want to flood it out so that it has too much on it at once. And then what I can do is take this cap jewel, the bottom part of it is actually the whole jewel, and I can put it on over the top. And what it'll do is it'll kind of seat itself in there, and thanks to capillary action, it'll just hold itself in place. And that's that oil being suspended. And now I can actually put it back on the watch itself, and that pivot will have fresh oil on it so that it'll run at maximum efficiency. And you also get the benefit of it making it last long too. So now everything's all done with the oiling, and let's see how this watch is running. Oh, that's a huge improvement from where we were before. Remember, it was snowstorming before? Wow, 0 seconds a day. 259 degrees of amplitude. The beat error is actually pretty off, but I can address that a little bit later. But this thing is running way, way better. Let's take a look at the crystal now. And as you can see, it's quite damaged. But that little magnifier is on the inside like we saw before. And that means that I don't have to try to track down another crystal. I want to keep this one because it has that cool little magnifier on it. I could get a generic crystal that's the same size, but it wouldn't have that on it. So I'm going to refurbish this crystal, something that I do every once in a while when I really want to keep the original crystal. And this is a multi-step process that I do where I'm going to use these sanding sticks, and I start off pretty high up, which is a finer grain. I don't go for the big scratchy one on this. This is an acrylic crystal. It's quite fragile actually. So you could take off a ton of material if you wanted to use like 400 grit or something. So I usually start up at closer to like 1,000 grit, and then I'll move my way up to about 7,000 grit at the top. And then we'll finish off with a compound called Polywatch, which is a polish that's specifically made for these acrylic watch crystals, and it works really well. And as you can see, as you work your way up the chain, it doesn't look very good. It's very foggy. And, you know, at some point you're probably going to question why you decided to bust out sanders on something like this. But if you trust the process and you wait until the end, even here, you can see that there's that kind of milky fog on there, but it's looking a lot better overall than it did before. But watch what happens after we get done using the Poly Watch. After that's done, this thing will look fantastic. These acrylic crystals, which are one of my favorite things about vintage watches, by the way, they have a totally different vibe than sapphire. Yes, they are more prone to scratching, but you can bring them back. I mean, look at this thing. You saw how banged up it was. It had definitely never been changed, and it had never been, polished or dealt with in any way. And look at it now. I mean, is that not an incredible result? And that took me half an hour or something, and boom, it's like new. So anyway, really, really happy that we're able to keep the original crystal for that watch because of that magnifier. It just makes it a lot harder to find. Okay, now we need to continue with the rebuild. So it's going to be time for the automatic winding works to go back together, and the reversing wheels, which allow that that rotor to spin either clockwise or counterclockwise and still wind the watch, which are these right here, these little reversing wheels. They need a special type of lubricant and cleaner. It's called Lubetta, and it does both. So it's kind of like it leaves a lubricating film behind, but it also acts as a cleaner because you can't disassemble these parts. They're riveted together, so you'll destroy them. So after that's done, we can continue putting back together the rest of the automatic winding works. It doesn't have that many parts. I wouldn't say it's simple. These are pretty well-developed systems that this is not, the first automatic watch, of course. So, this is one that's quite a bit down the line design-wise, and they really got good at it. They're very, very efficient. These things will wind themselves quite quickly, and they're so good at it that if you wear these watches every day, any automatic watch from the modern era, you never have to wind it ever. Like, if you have to wind your automatic watch because it stops, it means something's wrong. That's how good they are now. It's a very handy feature. Also, just if you're kind of a one watch person and you get an automatic, never have to wind it or set it. I guess that's not 100% true. If your watch does have a date function like this one, it just goes from 1 to 31 and just keeps rotating over. So on any months that aren't 31, you'll have to make an adjustment there. They have, by the way, designed calendar mechanisms that get around that. They even have ones called perpetual calendars that will appropriately set the date even through leap years. Like they're good for like 400,000 years or something. If the watch was around at that point, it would still have the correct date. How crazy is that? The only thing crazier than those is the price. If you ever see them, like they're usually over $100,000 that's called a perpetual calendar. So eye-watering prices, but pretty cool technology too, especially when you consider it's all just off of the same mainspring. No batteries, no computers, no nothing. Okay, I'm going to do a quick cleanup on the date disc here, just in case there's any dirt or debris on it. I'm not looking to do any big refurbishment on the thing, but just to knock off anything in case there was some dirt on it. Then I can put it back into place and start reassembling the entire calendar assembly itself. And as I thought, this is the part that I had taken off before and wasn't 100% sure. There's kind of two ways that calendars turn over when they go from one day to the next. It's supposed to happen at midnight, but some of them go over very slowly. Like you'll see let's say it's going from the 10th to the 11th. You'll see the 10 kind of creeping away, and then eventually the 12 will be in place. But this one actually has a mechanism there that I just put on where it kind of stores up that click and then bing, it knocks it over in one swoop at hopefully as close to midnight as you can get, just so that, it's accurate. But beyond that, this is a fairly straightforward calendar mechanism. This is a jumper. This creates a little bit of pressure on the inside ring of the calendar there so that it builds up that type of tension and keeps it so that the date can't be misaligned. That little jumper pushes in between the teeth, and when it pushes over to the next day, it pushes into the next tooth, and it keeps it so that it's aligned with the window. All right, so now we can get this retainer ring in place, and then this is actually the spring that pushes on that jumper that I was just talking about. Again, it's a little tiny spring, but not that much tension is needed for something like this. This is actually the spring that provides the tension to knock the calendar ring itself over, that, as I mentioned before. So now we can just screw this down. I should mention, by the way, that if you are looking to get into watch restoration as a hobby, I have designed toolkits that'll help you navigate those early stages of trying to figure out what tools to get. And I started a website with my friend Alex. It's called sutcliffehansen.com. It's down below if you want to check it out as well. And we've got ones for beginners and all the way up. Okay, now check this out. I need to lubricate where these two things meet, but I've got a little trick here. So I can wind it up so it's just about ready to click over, which will give me some space. And watch this. Bang. And see how it did it in one quick move there? That's what you're looking for. And now it'll also have a little bit of oil on it as well. Now, this dial looked to me as if it were dirty. It's also worn. So I'm going to very gently take this foam tip swab and just plain water and just give it the lightest once over in case there's any dirt, dust, rust, debris that might have been sitting on the dial. And that's it. So that's all I'm going to do. It looks fine. You don't want to push your luck with that type of thing. Now, one other thing I noticed though when I was taking it apart is the crown. And it looks like the crown is bent. Do you see how it's not turning over perfectly there? And that means I probably need to replace the winding stem, as it's the most likely thing to be bent. But I'm going to try out my replacement winding stem. Oh shoot, it looks like the crown's actually still kind of turning over, which means the inner part of the crown might be slightly bent. Now, I did find a new crown that I think will work. It looks like it's about the same size, but I want to test fit it, of course, before I go installing it or doing anything else. So let's see how it looks on the actual movement. Ooh. Shoot, yeah, it looks like it won't go down all the way. So it's not as deep as the crown that came with it. Take a look. This is the original crown. See, that's what it's supposed to look like. Well, that's tough. I don't have a replacement crown for this, so I am going to have to reuse this crown. Hopefully it's still functional, but I will replace the stem either way because it's a bit rusted and it could also be slightly bent itself. So the way that I'm going to do this is I'm going to take the new stem, line up the old stem because it was still the correct length, and then mark it off with a pen on where I want to cut. Now, as you may know, you don't want to cut it at the exact mark. You want to leave yourself some space. Like that. So I've got just a little bit of extra space there. And now I can use a file to do two things. One, I can deburr this. You don't want it to tear up the inner part of that crown if it has burrs on it. But also I can use it to gently remove a little bit more of the material from this as well, if it just happens to be that it's a little bit too long. And that way I can back down that size as I see fit rather than, doing it in one big hit and then feeling like, well, it's too late now. So that should be good to go. It's the same size as the one that it was before, so it should work. Now I can put the dial on. Pretty cool dial. There's a few different versions of this watch as it was produced for numerous years, and this is kind of the simplest dial of them, I think. Now, I'm not really sure what to do with this locking crown that works on that outside part of the bezel, but there is kind of a turning mechanism inside, so I'm going to put some silicone grease in there. Now, I do need to replace this crystal, but since it's tension ringed, I need to actually press it into place. This actually just pushes it straight down. I'm going to use a little bit of plastic here just to try to prevent any scratches and get it lined up perfectly. And you just kind of feel it set into place, and that should be it. That tension ring should keep it, it's attempting to keep it waterproof. And there we go. That looks beautiful, and I'm really proud of this. We still have that little window on the side. Now we can put on the bezel that we redid as well. Should just lock in place. Yeah, there we go. So it just goes on, and then you can tighten it down with that locking crown on the outside. Now, next we need to put on the hands, and that means, since this is a calendar watch, getting the calendar to just click over to 10 there to any day. That signifies that it's midnight because that's the exact time that you want the date to switch from one day to the next would be midnight. And then we can replace the hands here at midnight. I have to put the hands at midnight. On a watch without a calendar, you can pick whatever hour you want to put it on. But with a calendar watch, you have to line up the calendar and then put it at midnight. And this is, of course, just a good way as well to make sure, there we go, that everything's lining up properly. The last hand to put on is the seconds hand. And I just kind of use the edge of this press because it's actually so small. And there we go. And it looks like it's running straight away, so that's good news as well. Nice. This is looking good. Now we can start to actually recase this watch. Okay. And we can replace the crown and the stem here as well. This is looking beautiful. Mainly just because it's running. Oh, and the supervisor's here, so she has to make sure that everything looks kosher. All right. We got the lick of approval there from the supervisor, so we are now greenlit to continue with the restoration here. We'll put on the automatic winding works now. Supervisor drives a hard bargain, so we should feel lucky. And we can screw that into place. And just, you know, make sure that the rotor's spinning and working freely. You just want to double check that kind of stuff. Now, we do need to replace the rubber gasket that I mentioned on this because the old one was definitely worn out. So it's an easy thing to do. I just measure it up and boom, there it is. I've got a box with kind of all the different sizes of these, and I can just pick one out that I know is going to fit, put a little bit of silicone grease on it, and boom, there it goes. None of these vintage watches, they're rarely full-on waterproof anymore, like up to the spec that they were when they were made. But the real goal is just to make sure that, like, if you wash your hands or get stuck in a rainstorm, your watch isn't ruined. And this definitely passes that test. I would not go swimming with it, however. This is a pilot's watch after all. Okay, now we can put a brand new strap on it as well and take a look at this. How cool is that? Isn't that a great looking military watch? 24-hour, it's got the sweet bezel, it's got that extra crown down there, the big hands. I think this thing is just sweet. It even has some good history to it with the first GMT and all that. So I love this watch, but I noticed something. I noticed something that I needed to do a time lapse to show. Do you see what's wrong here? The hour and the minute hand aren't going at all. And that usually means that you have a loose cannon pinion, which again is friction fit. So I dug the cannon pinion. Yes, I had to take all of that stuff apart again, number 4 for this watch. And that's the cannon pinion. Now it needs to be crimped down a little bit. And I have, luckily, a tool for that. This is a cannon pinion tightening tool. And it's the same thing as the other tool that I used to clip off the end. It's an end cutter, but it has this extra attachment that allows you to limit how much that the jaws of it come down, because you have to be really careful with these cannon pinions. If you do it too much, you will 100% squeeze it down, fold that tube, and ruin it. So the way I like to do it is I line it up, and then I see it, I lift up the cannon pinion tool and I see if it'll grab it. And if it doesn't, then I tighten it down a little bit more each time until it does grab it. And then I can give it one more little tiny 16th of a turn, and then that'll be enough to actually crimp it down. And that's what I'm trying to do. So with that done, now I can put the cannon pinion back in place finally. And after another reassembly, we can do a quick check here on time lapse. And yeah, you can see now the hands are moving as they are supposed to. And we finally have a finished watch. And I think it looks awesome. There it is, the finished Glycine Airman. This is, again, a pilot's watch. It's a military watch. It was made in conjunction with the military, and we restored one on the channel here to its former glory. Thank you so much for hanging out with me for this journey. I really appreciate you taking the time. If you want to find me on Instagram, I'm wristwatch_revival. You can post some updates and stuff like that over there. You can come check it out. Otherwise, just wanted to say thanks once again, and we'll see you next time.